So thanks for inviting me. It is a pleasure to be here. I always love an opportunity to talk about what I do and what I know about Alzheimer's and other related dementias and aging in general. I am here. I have worked with older adults since the early 1990s. My first job, my first job here in Arizona with older adults was, I'm a social worker, so I'm a master's in social work, and my first job was at Generations, which was a geriatric psychiatry unit over at El Dorado Hospital. When I interviewed with the woman who was the director at the time, she said, "How long are you willing to stay?" And I said, "I don't know, a year, because I really don't like old people." And so I sit here 25 years later saying old people's my thing, and I didn't know that then. But what I realized was that not only the wisdom, but in Alzheimer's disease, I look at people with Alzheimer's disease as the Buddhas on earth. They are right here, right now. They're completely in the moment. And if you can get there with them, you can have an amazing experience. And I know it's really hard for families and for loved ones to get to that place. And I always get that from people. "She's so nice with you. She's not that way with me. How does that happen?" And it's because I'm having a different experience. And I'm experiencing where they are right now. And they're not my mother, and they're not, my sister or my spouse. So I can have a different experience, and I can look at them as this pure love and joy, and even if they're spitting at me and putting poop on me, I still have the experience of being right there, right now. And I have always wanted to be that person, that calm, in the moment person, and working with people with this disease process really helps me do that. So that's why I'm doing the work. Plus, you hear the most amazing things come out of people's mouths when they're in the moment. And it is, and I'm just going to tell you one thing before I start and tell you about what the disease is, but we had a woman, Jo, who was really, really agitated, and she was yelling, and she frequently yells. And so I brought her in my office, and she started telling me that she got invited to something, and she didn't know how she got invited.
I'm here for massage.
So she got pulled into something, and she didn't know, but what she did know was it was the lucrative swimming club, and she didn't know how she got invited to the lucrative swimming club. And I mean, you can't make that up. That is just an amazing thing. So we talked about the lucrative swimming club and had a really good time talking about the lucrative swimming club and how she could not get invited to this again because people were eating cake with their hands and they were a bunch of nutcases, and she did not want to be with them anymore. But for a career, you just don't get that anywhere else. So for me, it's part of the reason why I love the work that we do, because that you get that experience. So what is Alzheimer's disease? I'm going to start just talking a little bit about dementia. So dementia is the umbrella term. And dementia is really a syndrome, not a disease. It's a syndrome that a disease creates. Alzheimer's is a disease. So Alzheimer's, and many people will say it's a type of dementia, but it's really not, because dementia in itself is not a disease. It's Alzheimer's that's a disease. It's Lewy body dementia that's a disease. It's Parkinson's dementia. It's vascular dementia. It's frontal temporal lobe dementia. I heard yesterday there's 150 different types of dementia. It changes frequently. But it's a disease that causes the syndrome of dementia. And what's happening when a person has dementia is that brain cells are dying. So the neurons in the brain are dying. And depending on which one of those diseases you have, is which brain cells are dying first. With Alzheimer's disease, it's the brain cells in the hippocampus. And what happens is generally the things that are affected are memory, judgment, language, and behaviors. So those are the things that you will see with Alzheimer's disease and other related dementias. I will also say that all of us in the professional world don't really say dementia anymore. We say neurocognitive disorders, and that's a kinder and gentler way of saying it. And also, I've done talks about Alzheimer's and dementias for many, many years, and people are scared. They don't come. That's why you don't have people here. It's better now, but there still is a huge stigma around this disease, and wanting a diagnosis, getting a diagnosis, many people don't want to know, but the reality is the earlier you know, the more quality a person can have in their life over time. You can't make anybody get a diagnosis and do anything about it. However, what we know today is that the earlier you get a diagnosis, the better the course of the rest of your life could potentially be. So Alzheimer's disease is the most common type of neurocognitive disorder that there is. About 60 to 70% of people who have some type of neurocognitive disorder have Alzheimer's disease. Alzheimer's disease is basically when you develop neurofibrillary tangles and amyloid plaques in the brain. Nobody knows how those develop in the brain, which is why we cannot find a cure for this disease. So it's not like amyloid in your heart. It's not like plaque in your teeth, although I refer to it as plaque in your teeth a lot of the time because it makes sense. You have that white gunky stuff. You got white gunky stuff in your brain, you're not going to think real well. So what we know about Alzheimer's disease is that when we look at the brain, and we can diagnose Alzheimer's disease before death now. It used to be on an autopsy. You had to look inside the brain and see those plaques and tangles, but with the types of scans that we have today, especially PET scans, you can see plaques and tangles in the brain. So it's the hallmark of what Alzheimer's disease looks like. Pretty much everybody who has Alzheimer's disease has plaques and tangles in the brain. However, there are people who have plaques and tangles in their brain and look like they have Alzheimer's and don't. And that's another reason why we can't find a cure, because people can have, their brains can look like they should have had some type of neurocognitive disorder, and they functioned really well in their life, and nobody who knew them would say they did. There's a famous study out there, and it's from back east, I think Indiana, in a convent, where every nun who came to that convent had to agree to be in this study. And they, convent's a great place to do a study. You got a great control group. They're all living the same life. They're eating the same food. They all have a spiritual base. They pretty much go to sleep at the same time, wake up at the same time. Their lives are very similar. So it was a really good place to do this study. So the most significant thing to come out of that study, and everybody who went in there agreed to be tested every year, to have as many scans. And when they started, they didn't really have many scans that they could do, but over time they've developed different ways to look at the brain, and then upon death to have an autopsy and have your brain studied. So there were two nuns that were sisters. One was a couple years older than the other one, but they both joined the same convent, lived together their whole life at this convent. Toward the end of the older one's life, she developed Alzheimer's disease, and she needed total care. They took care of her in the convent. She had all of the symptoms of Alzheimer's disease, and she died of the disease. They looked at her brain. She had plaques and tangles. Her sister, who was 2 years younger than her, was not, she did well to the day of her death. She didn't die. She died a few years later. They did an autopsy of her brain. It looked exactly like her sister's. She had plaques and tangles. She had no Alzheimer's disease. The only difference that anybody could say was that the one who didn't experience the symptoms of the disease was more social. So that the other one was a little bit of a loner and spent more time by herself. But the sister who didn't develop any of the symptoms during her life was the social one. So I frequently get a question, how do you prevent Alzheimer's disease? There is no good answer, but you prevent it just like you prevented a lot of other diseases. You become a social person, you don't drink a lot of alcohol, you exercise, you eat right, and you have a lot of love in your life, really. I mean, those are the things that will really help you, just like any other disease. Unfortunately, about 5 million Americans get Alzheimer's disease, and almost 300,000 are right here in southern Arizona. So we have a lot of folks that experience this disease, and it's growing. Many people think it's growing because people are living longer, and also people are willing to get a diagnosis now, and so we're able to see how many people really are experiencing this disease. The thing about the disease is it doesn't only affect the person, it affects their loved ones and everybody around them. Because eventually the person will need 24-hour care, which is of course how Vanessa and I make a living, but it's hard to take care of people who have cognitive impairments at home. And the two basic reasons why people place their loved ones with Alzheimer's and other related dementias are safety reasons, so they're not safe, they're getting out of the house, they're combative or aggressive with their loved ones, and incontinence. It's really hard for loved ones to take care of incontinence at home. So really those are the two things that happen and the two things that really break the camel's back for people who want to place their loved ones someplace. So Alzheimer's disease, plaques and tangles in the brain. Anybody watch the 60-minute special on Alzheimer's disease? So you probably can watch it, and I would suggest that you do, because so it's hard to do longitudinal studies, because people, like if I asked you all, if I came in here and said, we're doing a study on Alzheimer's disease and we have a drug that we think will work, but we have to start early, how many of you would raise your hand and want to be in the study? Nobody, right? Because you don't have it. So you don't want to be in the study unless you have familial Alzheimer's. So familial Alzheimer's, generally affects people younger. If you have both the genes, so the APOE gene is the gene that we see is always present with Alzheimer's disease, and if you have two parents who have that, you have a much higher chance of developing the disease. There's a family in Colombia which was identified randomly some years ago that have the familial gene. And the folks in this family are related by blood down some lines, and there are hundreds of people in this family that have the same bloodline as the two people that had the gene many, many years ago. So what's happening with this family is that they are actually developing the disease in their 30s and 40s. So all of them are willing to be in a study to figure out what amyloid is. So actually the Mayo Clinic and ASU are involved in the study. We are really lucky here in Arizona to have ASU, Mayo Clinic, and the U of A who do really great research. So they are studying whether these families, and they hope to get longitudinal results, because one of the things people believe is that the plaques and tangles actually develop about 30 years prior to you getting any symptoms. So we should be able to, the goal of the study is to know whether we're barking down the right tree with our research. Is it really amyloid that's causing people to get Alzheimer's disease, or is it something else? Because if they say we don't see the amyloid plaques developing in every one of these folks, then they might have to take another road and figure out something else. Alzheimer's disease they've been doing research on it. So I've been working with people with Alzheimer's disease since the 1990s, and it really started to grow then. But money for research gets allocated by the number of people who die, or what the cause of death is on a death certificate. And many doctors are still reluctant to put Alzheimer's disease on a death certificate, because what do people die from? They die when your heart stops or your lungs stop pumping, right? So respiratory disease or cardiac disease, and that's what they put. So even though what's happening in the brain is that your brain controls everything. So if all your neurons are dying, your heart can't pump anymore, your lungs can't breathe anymore, your legs can't walk anymore, your body doesn't produce the same kind of fluids that it did. So it's your brain that's really in control of what's happening in your body. So when your brain starts dying, then everything shuts down, all the vital organs shut down, and people die from Alzheimer's disease or other dementias. So what's happened over the last 20 years is more doctors are willing to put that on a death certificate. And I believe that last year was the first time that Alzheimer's disease, the number that was allocated for research from the federal government was in the billions of dollars, not the millions of dollars. So that's a huge jump, and it's great. So hopefully, it is an epidemic, and it is affecting more and more people. It's a worldwide epidemic. The World Health Organization is doing studies. They have lots of numbers out about how many people in developing and non-developing countries. So it doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter what socioeconomic status you are. You're not immune to this disease. It will happen. So we know, and it's hard to predict. Many family members ask us, do you think I'm going to get it? If my mom has it, am I going to get it? It's not predictable. They do believe within the next 5 years they'll have a blood test that you might be able to take, but then there's the ethical question. Do you want to know? And with what's happening in our country right now, do you want it on your records? Because are you ever going to be able to get insurance again if you have Alzheimer's disease? So, there's a lot of ethical and moral issues around that. There also is a lot of those ethical issues of whether you tell somebody they actually have the disease. And my thing is that if people can understand they have it, you should tell them. Many people pass the point because what the neurons that are dying, especially with Alzheimer's disease, are the three things that people with Alzheimer's disease are not capable of doing are thinking, reasoning, and remembering. And if you don't remember anything else that I'm talking about, that's what you need to remember, because really those are where they have the problems. So if I say to somebody, so there is a man at Copper Canyon, Bruce, who I talk to just about every day and tell him he has Alzheimer's disease because he forgets and he wants to check out of this golf resort. And I basically say, you can't. And then there were a number of reasons why he got there, which involved the police and all sorts of things that were awful for him. When you remind him about it, he has a vague memory of it. But my feeling is he is okay enough when I say you have Alzheimer's disease to get mad at me. And so it's okay that I tell him that because he's thinking about it. And then he'll say, what does that mean? And I'll say, you can't remember stuff. And he's like, yeah, that's probably why I don't remember why I got here. So we can have that conversation. 2 minutes later, he's going to be at the desk yelling at people to get him to check out or call his sons or something like that. But in that moment, he understands what I'm saying. And so my feeling is, as a social worker, as a person who's an advocate for him, I'm going to tell him the truth. There will get to a point where he's going to believe it's the golf course and love it there and when's my 9-hole coming up. And I will tell him it's coming up right now and I won't tell him anything about the disease. But a person can understand it in that moment. I think they deserve to know. And that's just my personal opinion. So there are many other types of diseases that cause this syndrome called dementia. And the syndrome of dementia, the basic symptoms of that are confusion, disorientation, and that's really it, that confusion, disorientation. Very different than a delirium, and a delirium is something that you get from medication or anesthesia, or you're really sick. A delirium will go away, even for older people. It takes longer for a fragile older brain, but a delirium will go away. So important that if you think a person might be presenting with some type of cognitive impairment, that they have a thorough exam, because it could be dehydration, could be a urinary tract infection, it could be a delirium that's caused by a medication that a person is taking. Benadryl is the worst drug in the world for an older brain. You don't want people to be taking that drug. It will cause a person to be confused and disoriented over time. And so there are reasons why a person may be presenting that way, which is why it's really important to have a thorough exam and see if anything else is happening. Even if a person does have a cognitive impairment, you want to give them every possible, everything that they need to function. So if they have cognitive impairment and they have a UTI or they're dehydrated, they're going to be more sick. So their symptoms are going to be more pronounced. So we really want to treat all those things regardless of whether the person has a cognitive impairment or not. How am I doing? Any questions?
So how do you think something like BioTouch or something the family can intervene with, how do you feel that can work in the care of these problems?
So it's a great question. There's a couple things that I try to do with families. First, I try to get them to see their loved one through my eyes. So I try to tell them what I see. And usually it's something different than what they see. And there can usually be humor there. And humor, you know, is a great place to start with people who are distressed. So that's what I try to do. In the 25 years that I've done this kind of work, I've seen massage be really, really helpful for agitated people, even the most agitated people. Just 5 minutes of, you know, some type of gentle therapeutic touch really helps people. It can help them calm down for a short period of time. It can help them sleep, which is one of the issues that is really difficult. And I know there's a lot of research out there about massage. And not at Copper Canyon, but at other facilities that I've worked, we've actually had massage therapists come in. At the geropsych unit, we had a massage therapist on staff. So when all hell was breaking loose, we called Gary, he came out, and he touched people. It helped. So I think that I have seen it work. I think family members are begging for something they can do because they can't do anything, and they do feel really helpless. So I think anything that they can do will help them feel more involved, feel like they're helping their loved one in a way that maybe they can't do, because words are way overrated with this disease. So the less verbal you are, probably the better you're going to get. Result you're going to get with people, because language becomes really confusing. It's really confusing when you're cognitively intact. So when your brain's not working, it makes it even more difficult. This is what's happening to me. This is because I talk too much. Yeah.
Is head trauma ever an issue?
So